Why, hello, YouTube. This is Balor Mage again, and today, for anybody who hasn't been keeping up, we're going to rapid fire all of the spoilers that have happened so far up until now. What they mean, what impact they're going to have, if I think it's positive or negative, and I'm going to do it in the quickest way that I can possibly think of so that we get through them all and don't waste everybody's time. So, we've been having a spoiler a day for a little while. There's a small group of them. Some of them very simple. Some of them have more complex reasons to exist. But let's go. First one we got, if you haven't been keeping up, the quality life improvements, the Pantheon powers, the upgraded Pantheon powers, from now on will be shared account-wide. Fantastic change. Absolutely love this. Spoiler alert, there's definitely going to be a challenge this league to upgrade all of your Pantheon powers. Your ults will still have to get to the point where you unlock the base power. So when you kill the Brine King, but then you'll have access to all of them. It was brought up in the comments on their Twitter that some builds don't want, actively don't want the upgraded power. And so they replied with, there will be a way to turn them on and off, so you can select not using it. We don't know the details of that, but we do know you're not forced to have them on if you've unlocked them on one character and you build another one that needs to be frozen, or it's a reverse chill build and you need to not have 50% reduced effective chill or whatever. You will be able to turn them off, but otherwise all your ults are going to have all the powers right away. Huge buff. Probably the way it always should have been. I like it a lot. Hunting down Pantheon powers is often something I forget until the 90s on ults, so it'll be really, really nice to pick that up. Especially Brine King, giving you 100% chance to avoid being frozen while leveling from whenever that is, Act 6. That's going to be great. That was our first spoiler. Huge. Second spoiler that we got, also amazing. Really amazing. It is, just going to have that muted. It is one click to put in all of the currency in a trade window that is of that kind all at once. So that's going to be really nice. I saw 100 people must have asked whether this will also work for putting stuff in your stash or not. I could not find a response. They didn't answer. So I don't know if that's a no, or if they just didn't see it, or if they just haven't decided. But at least for trading and bulk trading currencies, huge. Absolutely huge. Hotkey for that, control and shift and click together. So control, shift, click, everything in. Huge, huge thing. Much less clicking. Absolutely fantastic. The next one up is also absolutely massive. Holding control while you're fusing or socketing something will spam those sockets now, which is fantastic. It does it at a pretty reasonable rate. Certainly not as quick. Here it goes on the auto. Certainly not as quick as you could rapidly click yourself if you really wanted to, but at a pretty good rate. It does seem like it's 5 or 6 times a second when he does it right here. So that's a pretty good rate to fuse stuff at. Really happy to not have all those finger pains. It's going to work for jewelers, going to work for fuses. However, it doesn't have a setting, so you won't be able to look for a 5 link. You will just be able to do 6 sockets, 6 links, or maximum sockets, maximum links. So that's fine. Absolutely great. Love it. Next one. Also fantastic. I actually avoid farming breaches because I'm really bad with mouse pointer accuracy, and clicking on all of the breach hands is awkward and annoying to do during combat. However, as of this coming league, just running near the hands is going to open them. So as you run past, hands open. That's all this one was. That's all this teaser was. It's a pretty minor thing. If you've got really good mouse pointer accuracy, clicking them might not have been a problem for you. For me, absolutely loved it. I actually actively avoid farming breach most of the time, purely because if you don't click on those hands, you don't get the rewards. Most of the rewards come from the hands. Some of the rewards come from killing the bosses or killing rares in here. Most of the rewards come from the hands. And if you're terrible at it, like I am, you miss half of it. So now you just have to run near them. That's fantastic. Next up is a nice crafting change, I guess, which is remove a random modifier and add a random veiled modifier to a rare item. The Ashling tier 4 modifier is now the veiled chaos orb thing. So whatever old veiled chaos orb is gone, it's now just veiled orb, and that veiled orb acts like the T4 Ashling or Aceling. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that. It'll be tradable. It'll only drop from Katarina, so no longer a world drop. We do not have any information on the old use case of veiled chaos orbs and whether that will still exist or not, so not sure about that one. But otherwise, this becomes tradable and does the same thing, so that's fantastic. I quite like that, but it will only come here. It'll only come here from killing Katarina. So there's that. The other thing that changed is that the 30% or 26 or 28, whatever the other versions are, quality will no longer exist from Katarina's thing. It is now Vala outcomes, which means, unfortunately, we're going to have to Val our flasks for a possible up to +10 on the quality and as much as -10. The other change that happened at the same time that they didn't announce, but they did show us, is that our flasks, our elemental flasks, have changed from 20% reduced damage taken to +5 max res again. This is a pretty big, meaningful change. A lot of people have been like, oh my god, we're nerfed, oh my god, we're nerfed. It's not really a nerf. It's a nerf in some cases and a buff in others. I will link this in the description. If this thing is relevant to you, you're probably going to want to have a look at this. Certainly, some builds are nerfed. Here's a spreadsheet from Reddit. Shows you the amount of flask effect you had compared to the old version and the new version. So if you had 0% flask effect and only 75 max res, flasks are exactly the same. Nothing changed. 5 max res was the same as 20% less damage taken. Absolutely nothing changed. The more max res you have, up to 85, the better the new flask is. Oh, actually up to 86, but at 85, the new flask will bring you to 90. So that's better than 20% less damage taken if you have no flask effect. The more flask effect you have, the better it, or the more flask effect you have when you're also stacking max res, the worse it gets. So there's this little golden line right here where if you existed here, you're greatly buffed. If you had, right here, if you had 82 max res in your old build and you had 60% flask effect, you're actually going to take 18% less damage. My personal Pathfinder builds usually existed between 80% and 100% flasks with about 88 to 90 max res, because these were like really min-maxed ones. That put my builds in this little square over here, where they would now take between 30 and 67% more damage than they did before. So some builds are buffed. The response to this from us, the players, should just be that we build things differently. I just wouldn't build this exact way before anymore. I would instead build, I'll focus a little bit less on flask effect. We'll get it to maybe 50%, right? And then we'll maybe sit here at 80 to 83-ish max res in that little window of goodness there. And then we'll invest in other defenses. The other good thing to note about this is melding stocks should be on the rise. The melding jewel should be quite a bit better. because now that we're getting +5 max res and we can buff that with flask effect, you can now use that with melding to get all resistances at max resistance out of just one elemental flask, which means for a lot of pathfinders that were running Topaz, Ruby, and Sapphire, you may now find a lot of builds running melding and just one elemental flask to give them all their max res, which gives me 2 extra flask slot back. We can use those 2 extra flask slots to invest in either more offense or defense in a different way. So it's not necessarily a nerf, but it's also not a buff. It's a change. It's a change back to how it used to be a few years ago. I'm fine with it. We'll all adjust. So that's the biggest one that's come up so far. All right, next one, super minor. This is not a huge deal, but it is really, really nice. Whenever you're harvest crafting, whenever you're harvest crafting, the tooltip of the item you're crafting on will just stay up while you're spamming craft on it. You won't have to move your mouse up and down all the time. Certainly a minor thing, but it's still a quality of life thing that's just really nice. This was always, to me at least, a frustrating thing. It's gone now. You don't have to move your mouse up and down. It'll just always be there. Pretty minor, but worth noting. All right. Next up, you can no longer get unidentified maps. Instead of unidentified maps, that pool of corruption chance when you corrupt maps and they become unidentified have a bunch of implicits that could happen instead. So we can get things like pack size, things like Atlas passives have 10% increased effect. Things like players' Val skills do not apply soul gain prevention. That one could be pretty cool. Lets you just infinitely use Val skills. That's a cool little change. I think for most people, it's not really going to matter much at all. There'll be certain strategies that don't work anymore. Corrupting a whole bunch of maps to just run the unID'd sextant for more pack size isn't really a thing anymore, but at the same time, some of the ones you corrupt are just going to have more pack size on them because of that. They're also going to have the increased effect of Atlas passives. Like, overall, not entirely sure actually why they made this change, but I don't see it as strongly positive or strongly negative. Just a little different. Bit weird. Okay, sure, whatever. Moving on. In the Necropolis expansion, stacked decks and Diviner's Strongboxes will no longer drop divination cards from boss exclusive unique items. So this one's a little bit interesting. I think that it might raise the price of some of the boss drops that were primarily, or at least a large portion of, were handed out by stack decks. Those won't be there anymore, so now boss drops will be a little more valuable. My best guess is most of those are only going to be about 10 to 15% more valuable than what they were, but that's not based on any statistics. That's just based on my thoughts. It could be as high as 40 or 50% without super shocking me. If it was any higher than that, then I'd be really surprised. The other side of that coin, though, is that in my opinion, stack decks may have actually been buffed, because taking all of the boss drop rewards out of the stack deck pool gets rid of a bunch of cards. And realistically, the only cards we were after when we were farming for stack decks were cards that give mirrors, cards that give headhunters, and cards that give mage bloods. And mirrors, mage bloods, and headhunters are not boss specific unique items. So I think this change is fantastic. I think it's absolutely brilliant. This is going to make boss drops worth a little bit more, and also stack decks worth a little bit more, because our good outcomes from stack decks are still there, and the fail outcomes that were just spamming the entire server with these boss drop uniques that had cards don't exist anymore. So I think this is a fantastic change. Super on board with it. We're going to skip over this one because I made a separate video on it and I'm not happy about it. If you don't know this one about the automations, I suggest you watch the last video I just posted. This is the only one that so far that I've been negative about, but that's in its own separate video. So we'll be leaving that alone. The last one is this one right here. This is the last one we've got today. Is you can now exchange Uber Elder fragments at the Hoarder crafting station. So before we could only swap Elder and Shaper fragments around to get the correct ones to run for just a little bit of harvest juice. Now you can do the Uber fragments for a little bit of harvest juice. That's fantastic. It only cost 800 per, so I absolutely love that. Quite good. The second part of this one is that Maven invitations will no longer drop. They don't exist. They're not real items anymore. You will never get a Maven invitation again. However, you will just be able to run that Maven invitation once you've witnessed it. So we're not looking for Maven invitations. We're just going and fighting the 4 Shaper Guardians, and then we will just be able to do the invitation. The only bad part of this for me personally is that you have to roll the invitation, like in their little map rolly bit. Like Kirak will just have the invitation ready to launch, and you will have to like alk scour, chaos spam, whatever things you're doing to craft it in its little window instead of it being an item. So it's a little bit less convenient to craft them, but realistically, the best stats that I was able to get was you had to run 5.2. This is just our best guess, but 5.2 Shaper Guardians for each 1 Shaper invite that you'd receive, which means you were never quite sustaining them to begin with. Now we'll be sustaining them because there's nothing to sustain. You can just run the content. That's fantastic. I do think that this will actually raise the price slightly of Shaper maps, Elder maps, and the other one that does Cirrus. I believe they'll all be a little bit more expensive. If I had to guess, I'd say about 20% more expensive than average, since before the community as a whole was sort of capped almost, or like held back by the fact that it was 5 or just over 5 bosses to an invitation drop on average, but you only need to witness 4. Which means some of them were just getting wasted looking for invites. And because you're wasting them looking for invites, you're then not getting Maven Splinters, not getting those rewards, not doing, because they're not witnessed, you're not getting all the extra buffs from that, all that. All that's out the window. We don't need any of that anymore, which makes those boss maps worth slightly more, since we don't have that limiting factor anymore. So that is all of them. Now you are completely caught up. I hope that helps everybody. I'm very much looking forward to this. I will see everybody next time. Goodbye.